Statistically, it's your eldest child who's going to grow up to be the highest qualified and earn the most money. Like, not all the time, but the majority of times, the eldest child grows up to be the highest qualified. It's not because you've given them the best genes, that's quite random. It's because you basically have your face in front of your first child's face for more hours per day in this first 1,000 days than you do with the next one generally, because by the next one, you've got a 2-year-old. So many things to talk about. I've narrowed it down to talking about the importance of one-on-one relationships, especially for infants. A lot of people think that social skills are going to be learned by putting the baby with other babies. So I want people to understand that social skills are, you learn social skills with peers or other people after you first have an attachment relationship. So you only learn to be friends with 5 people after you've learned to be friends with 1 person, and that is usually your mother. But the literature calls it the dyad, just coming from the word dialogue, meaning just a 2-way relationship. The reason they say that really is because it doesn't have to be the mum. There's no real biological drive in the baby to find their biological mother when they're born. I mean, obviously they recognise their biological mother. They recognise her smell, her taste, her sound. They know her, but their program is not saying attached to my biological mother. The program is saying attached to the most responsive person available to me. 9 times out of 10 it probably is mum, but actually if it's grandma who's raising the baby, then she's the dyad. If dad's staying at home and mum's going to work, then dad's the dyad. Traditionally in the literature, we don't talk about social skills until you're 3. People think if you start getting ready for it early, then you're going to be better at social skills. But what happens is if you start getting ready to be 3 early, when you're 18 months old or 1, you're not doing the important work of being an 18-month-old. Lots of people think, if I put my child into an early childhood centre when he's 6 months old and he's surrounded by 10 other 6-month-olds, that he's going to improve his social skills. And actually, that's not what the research shows. It shows that it will delay his social skills. It won't do him any harm necessarily, but it's just not going to speed them up. But to put it as plainly as I can, if we measure social skills in 4-year-olds, the only 4-year-olds who have better social skills than the ones who stayed at home with their parent in the first 18 months are the ones who stayed at home with their parent for the first 3 years. So yes, education's a good thing, but the type of education your child needs under 3 is primarily a one-on-one relationship.
What does the one-on-one relationship look like in practice? Like, what are some examples of that?
The most common example is a parent staying at home with the baby, and that's what's been happening for most of the time, that one-on-one relationship. Even when we say it takes a village to raise a child, absolutely it does, but that's when we're looking at the child's whole lifespan, it takes the village then. But basically no culture's ever interpreted that as meaning that mum gives birth to the baby, hands it out the tent and says, there you go village, raise my baby. That's just not how it's been interpreted. It means the village wraps supports around what is essentially a dyadic relationship in the first 18 months. So the village supports the mother and baby. In modern day times, what does that mean? That can still mean a parent at home with the baby. It can mean, like I've already said, about doing home-based care in the first 3 years, because the baby's going to get more of that one-on-one, intimate, auntie, nana, uncle type relationship, and they need that. In an early childhood centre, what it would look like is that babies are looked after under primary care. So instead of having the old industrial revolution roster, you're on nappies, and then we pass the baby to them because they're on bottles, and then we pass the baby to them because they're on sleep room, and then we pass the baby to them because they're on stories. That baby's transitioning. That's not primary care. That's not fostering a dyad in the centre. So the opposite would be that if I take my baby to the childcare centre and you're assigned as his carer, then 80% of the time you'll change his nappy, and 80% of the time you'll give him lunch, and 80% of the time you'll put him to sleep. He's going to get a dyadic relationship. He's going to learn to predict you, to know you. So he'll still be better off, frankly, at home with me, because that's the original dyad. But if that's not going to be the case, if I go to an early childhood centre, at least if you are doing 80% of his care, he's getting most of what he would have got at home. Whereas if he's going into rostered care, then I think that's detrimental. I think rostered care is really archaic now. I think people need to move on from that. It doesn't cost any more money. It's just a new way of thinking to do primary care. And I find that early childhood teachers find their job far more rewarding, because they didn't come into the job to spend all day changing nappies and to all day just be dealing with bottles. They come into the job for the holistic relationship with children. So you have deeper, more meaningful relationships with children when instead of doing a little bit for all 12, you're having quite a full-on relationship with 4 of them or 3 of them. That's so much better for the child, so much more rewarding for the early childhood teacher. It's amazing me how long it's taking to get that message out. Because it's not new information anymore. They're called the 1990s, the decade of the brain. Because we learned, with MRI scans and PET scans, we learned the equivalent in that 10 years that we'd learned in the 300 years before that. And probably the major key thing that we learned in the 1990s is about the first 1,000 days. The fact that you're not set by your genes. I mean, it's quite complex science, and genes obviously have a lot to do with it, but basically people think that if Albert Einstein is your birth father, then you've got the genes to be good at maths. And as long as we feed and water you and keep you alive, then you're going to be good at maths. That's why people don't traditionally value early childhood. They think that you're babysitting and that genes are doing, and biology is doing all the work, and it's been dictated by your genes. Whereas what we've learnt is that the human brain's basically designed to data gather in a way in the first 1,000 days of its existence. That's from conception until you're 1,000 days old, which is about 2.5. The brain's actually genetically and biologically designed to gather information on the environment it's in and to shape a brain for that environment. So the term that literature uses over and over again is the human brain is designed to be moulded by the environment it encounters, which just means we're not set. I mean, how can I summarise that for parents? That we can statistically predict your kids' outcomes when they're 32 with a really high degree of accuracy based on the data by the time they're 3. So for instance, we can statistically predict how much money your kid's going to be earning when they're 32 years old based on nothing else other than the number of words spoken to them in the dyad between the ages of 0 and 1. I mean, language is the most complex thing your brain does. So the more a baby's spoken to in the first year, probably the brainier they're going to be. It doesn't matter what you speak about. You can be talking about what happened on The Simpsons, because the baby can't understand English anyway. So as long as you're talking to them and engaging them, you're using most of the brain, and the data they're gathering as, well, this is a complex world. She's making me use most of my brain. I better wire up a really complex brain for this complex world of talking and interacting. It's just a coincidence that the same brain you wire up for talking and interacting is the same brain that's going to do national standards and literacy and numeracy and get qualifications, and it's also the same brain that's going to help you to control your anger and have empathy for other people. So you get all this good stuff by simply talking lots in the first year. But if it was just language, then we could just hire homeless people to stand at the end of your baby's cot and read a dictionary and they'd be getting all this language. And of course that wouldn't work, because the baby's got to be emotionally attuned to the person in order to for the language to work. Even the language the actual parent says directly over top of the baby but not attuned to the baby doesn't count. It's only the words that count when you're attuned. Now that people know that and know about the importance of that one-on-one, and all the people that are going, oh, well, like me, that put their children into care in the first year of life and might have been looked after by a roster, could be going now, have I wrecked the kid? So I'd like to finish by going, no, you haven't wrecked the kid. Children are amazingly resilient. All that's saying is that the dyad is one and probably the most important factor in a baby's well-being. But you've got to look at risk and resilience. Don't freak out if we say, oh, you put your baby into care in the first year of life, and so they had less of the dyad, because that's only one step that way. You will also, you sing to your baby, that's a step that way. You're engaging and watching education like this, so you're a parent that's engaged in ongoing education, that's another step this way. Every time your baby is hungry and you're feeding them, that's a step that way. You might use a little bit of second language, 2 languages with a kid. So actually, don't freak out that you've got one risk factor, it's where they end up on that scale. So yeah. You didn't wreck your baby. No, they'll be fine.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us about this topic. I think it's really, really important, Nathan.
Oh, cheers, Hilary.
And thank you for watching. Don't forget, if you like this video, then click that subscribe button just there and stay tuned for more early years inspiration.